I rang the doorbell at the mansion's massive oak front door. She looked over her shoulder to see if anyone she knew was passing by. I took Uber so as not to leave my car in plain sight. Thank God, the driver turned out to be a hillbilly from the opposite bank of the river who did not know me by sight and did not move in my professional or social circles. It's 11 o'clock Sunday morning and everyone should be at church. The street is deserted and that makes me happy. My husband is away at a conference until Wednesday, so I don't have to explain my comings and goings to him. I hear footsteps on the other side of the door. Can I do this? The doorknob begins to rotate. I take a deep breath. All right, girl, I'm involved, so I'm done. Oh my God, how did I end up in this situation? We're from the deep south. It is a tranquil land where tannin rivers flow through forests of moss-covered oaks on their way to our marshy seas. The social mores of our people often puzzle outsiders, but they fit us like old slippers. But not everything is as it seems at first glance. Powerful hurricanes and tornadoes hit this beautiful land without warning, and poisonous snakes and ancient diseases lurk in the mighty swamps. Maybe it's the sweltering summer heat and humidity, or the spicy cuisine, but here everything is felt more deeply than anywhere else. Passions are more ardent, love is more ardent, and hatred is more irreconcilable. Jesus said we should forgive, but he didn't say anything about forgetting. In our small southern town, my husband Ken and I were a charming, perfect couple. He was an athlete and I was a cheerleader. Popular and lucky in high school and college, we were on top. Always in the in circle, prom king and queen, invited into the right fraternity and sisterhood. We got everything we wanted. I turned out to be surprisingly smart for a dumb blonde and was the nerdy girl at our school. I ended up getting a master's degree in molecular biology and found a great job in a research lab in our city. I am continuing my PhD studies at a local university and will soon be able to add doctor to my Mrs. title. Ken was smart but lazy at school. He was cheerful, easygoing, and loved life. Barely graduated from college with a business degree. He used his good looks and boyish charm to land lucrative jobs, selling mutual funds and managing investments. It was his niche, and he was good at it. We got married after college, and our two professional incomes allowed us to live well. We spent nights on the town, traveled, were country club members, and drove sports cars. We wanted kids someday, so we invested in a nice house that was actually bigger than we needed and that we could afford. The economy was good, our career prospects were great, and everyone was moving up. But then the whole economy collapsed. Ken's company went bankrupt. The home loan has come due. The property was not for sale. When we were finally able to negotiate a new loan, our mortgage payments became exorbitant. With my only income, we were desperate. Nightlife, country clubs, and travel are gone. Our little investment cushion was melting as we tried to hold on to the house. All our plans and hopes for the future disappeared before our eyes when the situation began to deteriorate. We held on with all our might and slowly drowned. Ken's career prospects were bleak in this terrible economy. To help with expenses, Ken began working part-time at a local restaurant. He managed the restaurant owner's investments at his old job, and the owner was favorable to him. Ken helped with the bookkeeping, bartended, and whatever else was needed. He filled in for the regular bartender on Mondays and came in from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. to help out during happy hour on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. He came in several times a week to keep the books up to date. It all helped, but it was too little, too late to stop the financial tsunami that was consuming us. One Saturday morning, I went to the university bookstore to buy a used copy of a textbook I needed for a graduate course starting the following Monday. I've been saving money by buying used textbooks instead of new ones lately. My company paid for the training and sent me out early on Mondays for the course, which ran from 3:30 to 6:30 p.m. This allowed me to continue studying for my degree, even though we were now as poor as church mice. While standing in line to pay for my purchase, I heard a pleasant voice behind me. "Hi, Barb." I turned around and saw George standing a few feet away from me. He smiled pleasantly and said, Hi, I'm going to the cafe for coffee. Would you like a cup? We could chat. The bookstore had an upscale cafe, popular among students and teachers. Why not? I couldn't afford to go out for a long time. Of course, I answered cheerfully. I'll order it and I'll see you there. With that, he disappeared into the crowd. I blamed myself when he disappeared. I didn't tell him what I wanted. I hope he doesn't order me one of those fancy coffees with 1,000,000 calories. I love plain black coffee. The cashier called me to pay for the textbook. George went to high school with us along with Ken and me. He was a real science and math nerd. Small, chubby, and nearsighted, George was the subject of much ridicule and constant pranks, especially from athletes such as Ken. Before we had to stop going to the country club due to financial difficulties, we saw George there from time to time, but had little interaction other than the occasional, "Hi, how are you doing?" George received a scholarship to Georgia Tech after high school and seemed to do very well there. He returned to our hometown, worked for a local software company, and then opened his own. The company flourished and was eventually acquired by the tech giant. Now George was as rich as Croesus, according to rumors from my friends. I always felt sorry for George and somehow sympathized with him, not for dating or anything like that, of course. In 8th grade, we were assigned to do a science project together. That's when I realized that this boy is truly a genius. In addition, he was clearly in love with me throughout my school years, which was nice but nothing more. At the country club, I often caught his eye appraising me. This is fine. I always enjoy male attention. George had finally matured physically and became an attractive guy, not as handsome as Ken, but quite a good-looking, rather stylish young man. He traded his glasses for contact lenses and gained the confidence he lacked as a teenager. I walked up to the cafe and saw George sitting at a table by the window. When I approached him, he stood up and handed me a chair. His mom definitely raised him right. She would be proud. I saw that on the table there were 2 steaming cups of black coffee and 2 warm cakes filled with almond cream. These cakes were the cafe's specialty and my favorite when I indulged in baking. George clearly guessed my order correctly. I told George about my work in the laboratory Ori and studying for a PhD, but avoided the topic of Ken losing his job. George talked about the success of his first software company. He bought a house in a new prestigious area. Apparently, it was a real mansion. Now he was working from home, consulting and developing a new security software package that he hoped to sell soon for a large sum. Just 2 old school buddies making up for lost time. The friendly atmosphere changed when George said, "Barb, you and Ken are really in financial trouble. You have no resources left and your house will be repossessed in 3 weeks." It was too personal. Maybe his mom wouldn't be so proud of him after that. I coldly replied, "George, it's none of your business." George grinned with a smug grin and replied, "Come on, Barb, I'm in the computer world. If I want, I can find out more about a person than his own spouse." I felt very uncomfortable. He was definitely aware of our financial problems. And if you think about it, how did he know my ideal order in a cafe? I looked at him sternly and said coldly, "I think it's time for me to leave." George stood up and grinned. "No, no, finish your cake and coffee, I'll leave." "Barb, I have a lot of money and I can solve your financial crisis." Of course, I would expect appropriate thanks in return. He put his business card on the table. "Just think about it. You have no other options." He turned and left. If I had any other drink other than scalding hot coffee, I would have splashed it in his face, like in the movies. I couldn't believe the arrogance and audacity of this bastard. Coffee and cake have lost all appeal. I let George go, and then I left myself. I don't know why, but I took his business card and put it in my jeans pocket. Unfortunately, he was right. I really had no other options. The rest of the day was spent in the routine of Saturday grocery shopping, laundry, and other everyday affairs. George's funny sentence kept popping up in my mind. Inappropriate thoughts collided and swirled like a kaleidoscope and gave no rest. "Can I really do this? Let's call a spade, girl. This is sex for money. Hey, it's just sex. No one has ever accused you of being a prude, but no one called you an easily accessible woman. Will I be able to hide this from Ken? Mom would kill me if she found out. What about the girls in the sisterhood and the people in the church? I will never be able to hold my head up in this city. But we really need this money, and we need it now. So it was then no, then yes, then in no case, then, well, maybe. As soon as I made a decision one way or the other, my internal debate began anew. It drove me crazy. We were going to lose everything except our pride. Oh my God, we're going to have to go back to live with one of our parents. Even our pride will disappear. Ken left at 3:45 p.m. to help with happy hour at the restaurant. I usually study for a few hours, and when Ken returns shortly after 7, we grill steaks as a Saturday treat and have a romantic evening. Today, I poured myself a gin and tonic and contemplated my options. 2 gin and tonics later, I dialed George's number. He answered after the first ring and said, "Hi, Barb." It was creepy. I never called him or gave him my number, but he recognized my private mobile phone. "Okay, George, what are you really proposing?" I finally made a decision. Cash for sex. Well, that's pretty clear, I thought. I waited a few seconds. Let's not beat around the bush. How much cash and how much sex? Ever since Ken left for work, I've spent some time online researching how much call girls charge. The prices of the most popular girls in the city ranged from $600 to wedding $200 per hour, so I had some idea of how much my body was worth in the open market. However, I have a very beautiful booty and a rich client who wants to buy. That should give me a premium price, even in our small town. George was a successful entrepreneur, and the discussion quickly took on the tone of a business deal. We made a verbal contract for my adultery. I will be available every Monday after my class from 7 to 9. Deal for a block of 6 Mondays at $2500 for each Monday. Payment for the entire block will be upfront and cash. At the end of the block, we can agree on extension, or either of us could end the deal. And George was sworn to absolute secrecy. On my heart, I hope to die, stick a needle in my eye, and all that. I took a deep breath. Okay, George, deal. See you on Monday. I needed the block of 6 paid for right away to prevent the house from being repossessed, so I would be on my adulterous journey in 2 days. I will invest cash in different small accounts at several banks to avoid the attention of the tax authorities. This will triple the net profit from my adultery. When the first step into debauchery has already been taken, it is better to take more to improve your financial situation. I'll see how things go over the first 6, but I can imagine this going on for a while to rebuild our savings. Investment with the body, so to speak. We also developed a plan to avoid capture. Meetings will be at the Hilton, located on the edge of campus. The hotel catered to the technology companies that sprang up in the campus area. I finish class at 6:30 p.m., can leave my books in the car, and then walk 5 minutes to the back door of the Hilton. This entrance requires a guest key card for access. To get around this, George will leave an extra key in my car window slightly open in the student parking lot after checking in. I'll use the back elevator at the Hilton gym to go upstairs, minimizing the chance of being noticed. In the room, I can take a quick shower and be ready for George's sexual pleasure by 7. I'll shower again at 9, get dressed, and be home by 9:30. My excuse, if necessary, would be that I was doing research for my course in the university library, which is open until 9. On Mondays, Ken works a full bartending shift from 4 to 12, so he won't be at home. Nothing is foolproof, but this plan seemed safe enough. On that fateful first Monday, we followed the plan. By 5 minutes to 7, I had taken a shower and put on the clean clothes I had brought in my backpack. I took off my wedding and engagement rings and put them in my purse. I won't have sex with George while wearing a wedding ring. It's stupid symbolism, I know, but still. I took a deep breath and went out into the living room, which George had rented. When I entered the living room, George handed me a courier bag and a glass of strong bourbon on ice. "You're 15,000 and a drink." I smiled flirtatiously. Oh, thank you. I need to make sure you think this is a worthwhile investment. You know, it's been a long time since I've been with someone other than Ken. I might be rusty. We continued our stupid, flirtatious conversation until we finished our drinks. I exhaled and muttered embarrassedly, "Okay, time to earn money." I'm back into the spacious bedroom and turned to face George. Nervously, she slowly began to unbutton her blouse, carefully watching George. George stood at the entrance to the bedroom and looked at me. Then we had sex, and to be honest, I even liked it. I was lying on George's chest, breathing heavily and covered in sweat. I could hear his heart beating wildly in my ear. I smiled, enjoying the feeling of eternal female victory as we turned a proud male into a soft toothpick. I haven't eaten all day because of my nerves. Now that the dirty deed was done, I was hungry. George ordered New York strip steaks rare and all the accompaniments along with a bottle of wine from room service. We chatted pleasantly during dinner. I showered and headed home, arriving shortly before 9:30. I was shocked to realize that the evening of adultery had been fun, except for the overwhelming feeling of guilt for betraying my kind and decent husband. I couldn't sleep, and when Ken returned shortly after midnight, he found me nominally reading in bed. We had a nice chat as he got ready for bed, turned off the light, and snuggled down next to me under the covers. My husband quickly fell asleep and breathed rhythmically, with one hand hugging the chest of his adulterous wife. Sleep did not come to me, and I remained brooding over my moral shortcomings. I consciously sacrificed everything I considered important in marriage, honor, and integrity for the sake of financial security. I had crossed the sexual Rubicon, and there was no turning back. In the primitive regions of the male brain resides a fiercely competitive drive that rejoices in defeating other men. I suspect this competitive drive underlies their sports, war, politics, business, and courtship of women. At the most basic and primitive level, there is no greater victory than defeating a woman over another man and leaving her with a satisfied expression on her face. If the enemy learns that his woman has been taken by another man, the victory becomes even sweeter, and the vanquished are overcome with rage and despair. Well, at least I can try to save my husband from the humiliation and public embarrassment of finding out that his wife was sexually assaulted by a winner. My poor husband is doomed to suffer from George's repeated victories over him. I can only hope he never finds out about this. Mentally, I'm standing on quicksand, but I'm going to put my family on a solid financial footing, no matter what happens. Now we had working Mondays. We drank, had sex, and ordered dinner through room service. Then George may or may not have invited me to a nightcap. I took a shower and quietly returned home. Sometimes we were late, but I was always home by 10:30, long before my husband arrived. George was an experienced and varied lover. Although I would never admit it, I physically enjoyed sex with George and even, in a twisted way, looked forward to our hot Monday nights. But my mental hatred for George grew every time he took me. I couldn't forget that he used my desperation to force me to become an easy girl and humiliated Ken every time, making me gasp with pleasure during sex. But I still extended the contract for 6 more Mondays. I became a budget dragon. All unnecessary expenses stopped, credit cards were paid off, and I finally found a reasonable mortgage for my home. I did well in the lab and was recently promoted to head of the research group. Ken now worked regularly in the restaurant and proved himself to be a real talent in business. The owner loved Ken and planned to retire. No one from the owner's family was interested in the restaurant, so a deal was struck where Ken would take over the restaurant and gradually buy out the owner. Within a year, Ken will become the full owner of the restaurant, and it will flourish. Thanks to a steady flow of my easy-to-find money and Ken's improved prospects, we were brought back from the brink of financial disaster. Having a home, children, good schools, traveling, and retiring became realistic goals again. George and I decided to stop our meetings after the 4th block. If, as I suspected, this whole plan was some strange fantasy of George's to punish me for my youthful abandonment and to get back at Ken for his cruel jokes, then constant sex for the last 24 weeks should have satiated that fantasy. As George crudely puts it at the end, "Barb, you're a wonderful lover, but expensive." This added another insult to the list of reasons why I could hate him. But it was all over now, and hopefully George could keep his mouth shut. Perhaps things will still turn out for the better. The good life is back. We started planning seriously for when we would start working on our first child. I dreamed about how we would paint and furnish the nursery. I have passed my doctoral exams, and writing my dissertation will take about 15 more months. Then I can happily start creating the family that Ken and I want. Our parents were looking forward to us starting production. Ken now managed the restaurant and would soon become its full owner. The business was thriving, but it required a lot of work on Ken's part. I came on Friday and Saturday evenings, when it was especially busy. I helped where needed, doing everything from cleaning tables to bartending. On other days of the week, when I wasn't helping at the restaurant, I was working on my dissertation. It was a busy but happy time for Ken and me. I'm a nice girl, and part of my value to the business was interacting with clients, which I enjoyed. I had a choice of elegant yet sexy outfits to wear to work on Friday and Saturday nights. These outfits attracted the attention of men, and I was vain enough to enjoy my influence over them. George was a repeat customer and actively recommended the restaurant to Ken, referring business to us. Ken and George, who had absolutely nothing in common except my body, made contact. The word friendship did not fit, but their relationship was quite cordial. This really annoyed me. When George came with a girl, it also annoyed me. What a paradox. If women cannot understand themselves, what can we say about men? In the laboratory, I have access to a variety of exotic organic and inorganic poisons. I'd love to slip one of these into George's drink one night. Of course, I couldn't do this with impunity, but it was nice to fantasize about it. This man turned me into a girl of easy virtue. He tore my pride and destroyed my beliefs about myself. Even worse, he humiliated that thug Ken, my beloved husband. I will never forgive this. When George was around me, he was always extremely polite and correct and, fortunately, never even indirectly hinted at our sexual or financial history. It didn't make me hate him any less. The handle of the mansion's massive oak door completed its turn, and the door swung open. George stood barefoot in jeans and a boring t-shirt. His eyes opened wide in surprise when he saw me. Well, they could. I stood there in high heels, a tight black miniskirt that barely covered my buttocks, and a sheer beige blouse. I wasn't wearing a bra or a tank top, so my breasts were practically on full display. The panty line was also not visible in this tight skirt. The Uber driver is probably still fantasizing about his latest passenger. "Barb, what are you doing here?" George asked in bewilderment. Despite his confusion, his eyes greedily absorbed all my feminine charms, which I demonstrated to whet his appetite. I pushed past him into the hallway. I wanted to get off the street before anyone saw me dressed like a real easy-to-get girl. I pouted and said in a silky voice, "George, it's not customary to say that to a lady who comes to visit you." I quickly walked into the living room and looked around. The living room was huge. On the left, there was a corridor leading to the bedrooms, presumably. There was a formal dining room to the right, and then probably a kitchen. At the back of the living room, open French doors led into George's large home office. It was filled with electronics. Apparently, he was working in his office before my arrival brought him to the door. Through the office window, I could see the pool and manicured lawn. On weekdays, a butler, a maid, a cook, and a gardener worked in the house. From my previous experience with George, I knew that they were all out on weekends, and he usually worked at home alone on Sundays. "Very beautiful, George. It's too elegant for a man to do it. You have to give me the name of your decorator." I turned to him. He followed me out of the corridor and stood with his arms crossed and smiling cheerfully. He was definitely looking at my half-covered buttocks. They're actually quite good, if I do say so myself. But not today. I have another plans. Is it too early for a girl to drink here? Maybe white wine? "Of course," he replied, walking over to the small bar off to the side of the living room. I followed him to the bar. With some effort, I sat down on one of the two-bar stools. I tried to get the skirt fabric to cover the most important parts of my naked lower body. She placed her purse on a nearby chair. How about a Spanish Albarino? A wonderful, refreshing white wine. Sounds great, I replied. George poured 2 generous glasses, pushed one towards me and leaned against the counter, looking at me curiously. What brings you here, Barb, and where is your husband? I looked at him with a flirtatious look. My husband and chef are at a conference in Atlanta. They left early this morning and will be there until Tuesday. Their assistants manage things while they are away, so I have some free time. I thought I'd go see an old friend. We drank wine, looking at each other. George broke the silence. I came to visit, yes, of course, you are always a welcome guest here. I remember we had a great time together. But I must ask, what are the terms of your visit? Oh, stupid boy, you rented me before. This time I came of my own free will. A girl can be more assertive these days than in modern times. I understand. But why did a married woman suddenly decide to visit me? And why me, of all people? Smart, beautiful, successful. The only time I was on your radar was when you needed my money. I took a sip of wine, smiled my most seductive smile, and leaned forward, giving him an extensive view of my breasts. His gaze was focused on my chest. George, to put it bluntly, you gave me 6 months of the best sex of my life. I just want to taste this forbidden fruit one more time. And my husband just left town. There's no better way to get a man to dance to your tune than to compliment his sexual prowess in bed. Of course, I saw George swell up like a toad. I hooked him. I unbuttoned the top button of my blouse and took a sip of wine. I undid the second button, keeping George's attention. Of course, I see that I have interfered with your work. I undid 2 more buttons and took another sip of wine. Maybe I should just finish the wine and go home so you can get back to work. I undid the remaining buttons and took off my blouse. I calmly hung it on the back of the nearest chair. George, I really like this wine. I took a sip and continued, my husband thinks I'm in the university library doing research for my dissertation. The library closes at 6 p.m. on Sundays, so I need to be home soon after to talk to my husband when he calls from Atlanta. Until then, I'm free to spend my time as I please. I took off my shoes and stood up. Slowly, she unzipped her dress and dropped it. I walked away from the small stack of fabric, folded it, and placed it on the bar stool. George's eyes never left mine, and there was a hot, lustful look in them. Yes, I caught him. I walked across the room, walked up to him, and slid my hands under his t-shirt, saying, "Ugh, this seems like an unnecessary obstacle." I quickly pulled it over his head and threw it on the floor, then slowly began to stroke and kiss his chest. I purred, "What will you say something, big boy?" George was grinning like the cat that ate the canary. He replied hoarsely, "I think it would be rude of me not to make time for us to meet." I purred, "Oh, good. Now drink your wine while I do something." I listened to George's steady breathing next to me. I was exhausted and wanted to join him in the dream world. We quickly had sex in his bedroom, both passionate and fiery. Now he was fast asleep. A woman has more sexual stamina than a man, but I felt like I had run a marathon. I hated that bastard George, but damn, he really knew how to please a woman. I quietly slipped out of bed, making sure George was still asleep. I walked barefoot into the living room and picked up my purse, which I had left on the bar stool. I took out a flash drive and a mobile phone. I listened to make sure George wasn't making a sound. Everything was quiet. I walked into George's office. The computer was on and waiting for George to get back to work. I inserted the flash drive. The indicator on the flash drive blinked, indicating that it was performing its tasks. I texted the number they gave me, loading. It happened last week on Friday when one of the housewives was unable to go to work because of a sick child. I replaced it. By 10 p.m., the dinner rush had died down and I was no longer needed. I talked to Ken for a couple of minutes, walked around the room, talking to the guests, making sure everything was okay. After walking around the hall, I headed to the bar, where it was still crowded, to chat with the guests. As I walked into the bar, a loud voice said, "Barb, come here. I need to talk to you." I looked and saw Sergei, a large Russian who fled to America as soon as glasnost made it possible. He was a professor of mathematics at Moscow University and received a partial position at our university. He also founded a technology company on the outskirts of campus that he said combined Russian genius in mathematics with American skills in hardware and software. The company's employees were a wild mixture of refugees from the former Soviet Union and local talent. The company was a phenomenal success, and Sergei fought off all attempts by large corporations to buy it. There were rumors that he still had connections with unsavory elements in Russia, but I suspect these were just student rumors. I met Sergei when I took his course, Higher Mathematics for Scientists and Engineers. I found him to be an excellent teacher, a brilliant mathematician, and a kind-hearted, if somewhat boisterous, gentleman. He and Ken also quickly became friends. Sergei convinced Ken to include some classic Russian dishes on the menu and add the best Russian vodka to the bar. Sergei was known and loved both at the university and in the city. I walked up to Sergei's table with a smile. It was nice to see him. Sergei admired. "My beloved beauty, how many hearts have you broken today? Sit down, sit down. Let's drink vodka." I laughed at his words. "Sergei, I won't drink vodka with you. I know better. One day I will teach you how to drink a Russian drink, and today you can drink it like a southern lady. This is a good imported Russian beluga vodka, not the vodka that Americans usually drink." Sergei did not stop. "Today I had lunch with your leader. He said that you passed your doctoral exams with flying colors and are working on your dissertation. Very important. Don't delay, go and finish this damn thing. I heard that after graduation you will be offered the position of assistant professor." I shook my head at Sergei's words with a smile and took a small sip of fiery vodka. "You need to finish this first before you worry about it. I dove into the literature review and am almost done with the pilot design. Everything goes well." We continued to chat about campus news, city news, and personal matters. Sergei ordered a third vodka for himself and a second for me. I tried to refuse, but Sergei's kind-heartedness and old-fashioned charm made it impossible. Sergei folded his hands in front of him, leaned forward, and spoke quietly so that only we could hear the conversation. "You know, Barb, I don't like your friend George. I gave him a job when he graduated from Georgia Tech. 10 months later, he quit. All that cutting-edge software I paid him for was suddenly patented and sold by his new company. He's a thief." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I don't like my name being associated with George for obvious reasons. "Sergei, George studied with us at school along with Ken. We weren't friends. We've all heard about his financial success, of course. He comes to the restaurant sometimes, but that's all we see of him." My cheeks were probably burning. I hope Sergei didn't notice this. "Oh yes, I understand. Well, in a month or so, it will release a new top-tier security software package. They say it will be the best on the market, particularly good for protecting against ransomware. Pre-orders are said to already be in the millions. He is highly respected in the industry, truly one of our geniuses." I didn't like this conversation, although I didn't understand how he related to me. I simply nodded my head, muttering a neutral, "Yeah." Sergei looked away, looking towards the bar, and nodded at me. "Some friends from my home country are very concerned about this program. It threatens their very profitable business." I shuddered. "Does Sergei confirm rumors about his connections with criminal elements in Russia?" Sergei turned back, looking into my eyes. "Barb, you have to remember, my home country now is a lawless place, like your old Wild West. I don't do what my old friends do, but I'm an American citizen and safe here. My friends live and struggle to survive in a chaotic and corrupt world." Sergei shrugged his massive shoulders and sighed. "But we have been friends for a long time. We studied together. They were persecuted by the communists. 2 even spent time in the gulag. I was almost imprisoned too. A few months ago, my friends came to me for advice about this problem with George. I can't refuse them. I quietly said, Sergey, this is not information that I should know or hear. Sergey looked at me sadly. Barb, I'm afraid I must. My friends organized surveillance of George, looking for weaknesses or incriminating evidence. They intercepted the Hilton's CCTV cameras from the rear exit and hallways, which showed a beautiful young woman going to George's room many, many times. They asked if I could identify the woman. My face probably turned as red as Rudolph's nose. I was exposed. My worst nightmares become reality. I couldn't see Sergey's gaze. Sergey patted my hand. Barb, let me tell you a story. My parents had been married for 4 months and lived in a small village south of Minsk. The Nazis came and burned their farm and village. Many were killed. The women were repeatedly attacked and then shot dead. My mother, like you, was a beautiful young woman. The German general added her to his entourage to have fun in his free time from work. My father escaped and fought with the partisans in the swamps of Pripyat. My mother was a Nazi's prostitute for almost a year before she was able to escape. She returned to my father and joined the partisans in the swamps. If a German was captured, my parents ensured that he would die very slowly. Sergey's voice became softer. Look at me, Barb. I looked up at my old friend. I don't judge. I know you and Ken were in dire financial straits at the time. We have to do what we have to do to survive. Only I know the identity of this young woman. I asked my friends to give me all copies of the intercepted recordings. They were destroyed. Tears blurred my eyes as I lowered my head in complete humiliation. Thank you, Sergey. I have to keep this a secret from Ken, I whispered. Sergey lifted my chin to look me in the face. Your secret is safe with me, Barb. He smiled broadly. Now to other matters. You know, I love American literature. I especially like Southern heroines, women like steel magnolias. Such women are strong in the face of adversity and ardent in their passions, and they are patient and merciless in their revenge on their enemies. Sergey looked at me questioningly. So, Barb, do you want to take revenge on George? I laughed weakly. Yes. I hate myself for what I did, but I hate him even more. I fantasize about bringing poison back from the lab and slipping it into his drink. But what can I really do? Sergey ordered us another portion of vodka. I really shouldn't have drunk more, but I took a big sip when my drinks arrived. The fire of vodka burned my senses and seemed to clear my head and remove the shock. Sergey continued thoughtfully, people from the Caucasus in my country say, a female killer is more deadly than a man. Even the most vigilant warrior will take off his armor to sleep with a woman. My friends can't get through George's armor. Do you want to try? Sergey put the flash drive on the table between us and sat down, watching me. I stared at the flash drive, thinking about the consequences. And what will this do to him? Sergey responded dispassionately, this will destroy him. You don't need to know more. I took the flash drive. Having met Sergey's gaze, I firmly answered, yes. Sergey smiled broadly. Okay, it won't be easy. His computer must be turned on when you insert the flash drive. It will launch automatically, but installation will take a few minutes. Then it's important that George gets away from the computer. I smiled faintly. Well, everyone knows how I can do it. How long should he be distracted? Sergey replied, at least 2 hours. The longer the better. How much time can you promise my friends? I gave Sergey a wolfish smile. If I haven't lost my skill, then at least 3, and most likely more. We'll set up a warning system in case he tries to escape my web. The indicator on the flash drive has stopped blinking. Mission complete. I wrote the text, booted up, and took out the flash drive. I walked up to the bar and grabbed my purse. As I approached, I heard George's voice from the corridor, Barb. Damn, he didn't sleep as long as I planned. I cheerfully replied, here, honey, I'll grab some lip balm and water. Would you like some water? Please. I quickly put my cell phone and flash drive back in my purse and took out my lip balm. I threw it on the counter as if I had just used it. I quickly went back to the bar and filled 2 glasses with ice water. When I turned around, George was almost at the bar. Damn, that was close. I handed the glass to George and cheekily said, God, that was fun. Better drink more fluids because I want to repeat. George winked at me and we both took big gulps. Since you need to come back early to talk to your husband, how about an early dinner? I have some great ribeye steaks in my freezer. We can defrost them a little. I have a wine that was highly recommended by my wine merchant. A good reason to try. Sounds great. While George defrosted the steaks and decanted the wine, I thought, we need to keep him busy for most of the rest of the day. I was looking for ideas. George, how private is your pool? He looked at me with raised eyebrows. Swimming pool. It is heated and protected by a screen. The plots here are large, with fences, but the neighbor on the top floor can probably see the pool. Why? Is there something on your mind? I grabbed his hand and pulled him away, laughing. Come on, I feel very naughty. Let's go skinny dipping. I squealed like a teenager as I jumped into the water, and we quickly began playfully wrestling, enjoying the sliding of our wet bodies against each other. After some childish and flirty fun, I dragged him to the end of the pool. I challenge you to a race to the other end. The loser must please the winner. With these words, I took off swimming, stealthily starting first. Even without cheating, I expected to win and hoped to have a good time. I keep myself in shape and am an excellent swimmer. George was never an athlete. Imagine my disappointment when he was half a length ahead of me when we reached the far end. He grinned. I swim 2 miles every morning. You picked the wrong sport, girl. Okay, Barb, it's time for you to pay your debts. He led me to a chair by the pool and sat down. I lost and had to please him. I stood up, tossing my hair, and smiled at George. You are a very funny man. But after this, I need whiskey. Let's go. We went to the bar and poured ourselves a glass of bourbon with ice. I purred. Now I want a tour of this beautiful house. He's great. I oohed and admired every room, furniture, and artwork. George was proud and enjoyed showing me everything in detail. I quickly walked past his office, saying, "Oh, this looks too much like work. Let's leave that for another time." When the tour ended, I went up to him and said, "I'm all dirty thanks to you. I need a shower before dinner. Do you want to help?" He agreed, and we spent quite a lot of time soaping and rubbing each other, laughing and squealing. After that, I put on one of his t-shirts. I've never met a man who wasn't fascinated by a girl wearing a thin t-shirt that barely covered her bare ass. George's attention was focused on me, not on his computer, where the Russian gremlins were hopefully doing their evil. While George grilled the steaks and decanted the wine, I microwaved 2 potatoes, sautéed some mushrooms, and made a quick salad. Dinner was delicious, and we both had great appetites after the day's entertainment. After we put the plates in the sink, I invited George to play pool in his game room. He beat me in 2 quick games, but at last I received the prize I had hoped to win in the race, lying on the pool table while George skillfully satisfied my desires. It was an amazing experience. I ended up bent over the pool table and squealing with pleasure as George fucked me for the last time that day. It was almost 6:30. I almost doubled my promise to the Russians about how long I would keep George distracted. But now I'm late. I turned to George with a satisfied smile. Darling, I'm a married woman, and now I have to become a pumpkin. I kissed him on the cheek and said, "That was fun. Thank you. Can you call an Uber to take me back to my car at the university?" I grabbed my clothes and purse and walked into the bathroom and said, "I need to get cleaned up. I'll be there in a minute." In the bathroom, I wrote a message, completed. I got dressed, called an Uber, and had a pleasant conversation with my husband shortly after returning home. I was hoping some dramatic disaster would befall George. But when I gave Sergei a report on the successful mission on Sunday, He warned that it would take time for my efforts to bear fruit, but my impatience grew as the weeks passed. Unfortunately, I was once again on George's radar as a sexual partner. He invited me to meetings many times when he saw me in a restaurant. I tried my best to avoid him and made excuses. I would love to, but I'm a married woman. I'm working on my dissertation. I'm afraid Ken will do it. Find out. And so on. However, to avoid arousing George's suspicions about my Sunday visit, I met with him 4 more times over 2 months at our old Hilton hotel. I trembled, knowing that CCTV footage could be hacked, but I hoped that no one would do it this time. I used the pretext of library research to hide the traces of adultery from my husband. Finally, one Friday, walking into a bar, I heard Sergei's loud voice. "Barb, come with me for a drink. I have news." I felt a surge of excitement and quickly walked over to his desk. Sergei stood up and hugged me, whispering in my ear, "Oh, my Dalida, you cut Samson's hair." I quickly sat up, clapped my hands in excitement, and asked, "What? Tell me." Sergei pushed a glass of vodka towards me. "First, let's drink to our success." In Russian, "That's it." With these words, he threw back his head and drank a glass of vodka in one gulp. "Sergey," I began irritably. "Oh, okay." With these words, I followed his example, slightly choking on the fiery liquid. With watery eyes, I exhaled, "Okay." I drank. "Now tell me." Sergei smiled widely, slapping me on the shoulder. "Okay, I'll make a Russian out of you. Now the news. George's software went on sale last month, and sales have been very good. Better than expected. He raked in money with a shovel." I groaned. "Sergei, after everything I've been through, I wanted to destroy him, not make him richer." "Be patient, dear. On Tuesday morning, there were 10 successful ransomware attacks on computers protected by George's new software. The hospital, 2 insurance companies, 3 banks, 3 large corporations, and the state tax office received millions in ransom demands." Sergei shrugged. "What could they do? 9 have already paid." I smiled, understanding how everything was happening. "So now these companies are going to sue George for defective software." But I underestimated the cunning of Sergei and his friends. He replied, grinning evilly, "Oh yes, that's for sure. George was overconfident and guaranteed his product. But the FBI also found some documents implicating George in ransomware attacks." I muttered, "I don't think your friends in Russia had anything to do with the leaking of these documents or the ransomware attacks, right?" Sergei simply smiled and shrugged, continuing, "Every programmer has his own style. Just as a bomber leaves his signature on the bomb assembly, so a programmer leaves his signature on the coding. The back door in George's security software is a subtle, very clever bug, written in George's style." George realized he had been set up as events unfolded this week, and he faced financial ruin and a lengthy federal prison sentence. He fled the country last night. He's broke and probably hiding abroad, out of reach of the American justice system. I sat down, satisfied. Revenge truly is a dish best served cold. And it was amazing. Sergei took an envelope out of his pocket and handed it to me. The flap was not sealed. I looked in and saw a check made out to me for $100,000 from a Bahamian bank. The assignment line read, "For consulting services." I looked at Sergei questioningly. He replied, "My friends just made $9 million that they couldn't have made without your help. You also eliminated a serious threat to their business. They wanted to say thank you." Sergei poured more vodka, and we drank to the success of our mission. I felt satisfied and light, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. We continued the conversation, but now it was lighter, without the tension and fear that I had been experiencing all this time. A few weeks passed, and I began to notice my life returning to normal. I was able to focus on my dissertation and work, and my relationship with Ken was even better than before. We were a team, supported each other, and made plans for the future. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.